So let's get talking in the moment. Dr. Moda Yusuf is CEO Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, CPPE, joins me via the Zoom call now. Thank you for your time, Doctor. We appreciate you for coming through.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, first I need to get your take and your expectations. What are your expectations as regards the Cbn'S Monetary Policy Committee, which is underway now?
Well, my expectation is that the parameters will be held constant, even though there is a very strong temptation to increase rates, particularly on account of the inflationary pressures that we're experiencing, not just in Nigeria, but across the world. In many economies around the world, the CBN their central banks have been tightening their monetary policy. They have been hiking rates, whether I talk of US, Europe, South Africa, and the rest of them. But there's a peculiarity here in Nigeria, and the peculiarity is that, first, we are still struggling with issues of recovery, issues of unemployment. Secondly, our financial system is already very tight. Tight in the sense that we already have our CRR at 27.5%, which is quite high, one of the highest that you can find anywhere around the world. Our liquidity ratio is at 30%. CRR, which is the cash reserve ratio, is even much more than 27.5%. For some, effective CRR is as high as 50%. So the situation is already very tight for the financial system. And the inflation that we're experiencing are not exactly monetary credit-driven inflation. They are more or less or essentially supply-side inflation. The inflation that have been inflicted by the shocks on the supply side. And what I mean by that is that when you look at food inflation, for instance, you look at the role or the impact of the insecurity on food supplies, you'll appreciate that part of the reason you have food inflation or heightened food inflation is the problem of insecurity that we're experiencing around the country, particularly in the food producing areas. Then we have the issue of energy costs, the cost of diesel in particular, the implication of that for cost of production, and the implication of that for the cost of transportation. That is also a major issue. That is not a monetary issue, you know? So when you combine, when you look at all of this, and of course you have the issue of the exchange rate depreciation, you know, which also has been contributing a lot to the inflationary pressures. So most of these factors that are driving inflation are not strictly monetary. They are not strictly driven by credit. And unlike many other economies, this economy is not credit driven. The level of consumer credit is extremely low. SME access to credit is very low. So even if you adjust rates, it may not have any significant impact on the inflation objective. So that is why I feel that perhaps we can say that we have reached the limit of the deployment of monetary policy instruments. We should be looking more on the side of fiscal policy and more in the area of dealing with the supply side issues. So that is why I feel that although the temptation is high to hike rate, but I think what makes sense is just to retain the rates that they are.
Give us a picture of the other side if the inflation or the CBN comes up to review it upward. Give us a picture of what that particular side of the coin will look like if the CBN, review upward, because you have also said that there's a temptation to review upward.
Well, the implication of an upward review in rates, first, it will be that the cost of fund is going to increase for the investors or private sector players that are already exposed to the credit market. You know, I'm talking of those who are about to borrow or those who are already indebted to the banks, those who already have exposure. That means that their cost of funds will increase. And that means that additional pressure will be experienced by investors in the economy. Already, many of these investors are experiencing very serious pressures from the foreign exchange depreciation. They're experiencing very serious pressure from the high energy costs. So if we experience a hike in rates, that's additional pressure from the funding side, from the credit side. So it's going to put a whole lot of pressure on investors and on the economy. And it may not necessarily achieve much in moderating inflation. So that is what it's going to be. So the pressure will be more. So that means that many of these investors will increase their prices where it is possible. If it's not possible for them to increase prices, that means they will have to bear the additional burden of costs. And the implication of that is that their profit margins will be further eroded. Their capacity to create employment will be further eroded. The capacity to expand will be further eroded. The returns to shareholder will be further eroded. So that is the kind of outlook or the implications if you have a hike in rates.
Mm. You talk about, Dr. Muda, you talk about the fact that the economy we have now is not credit driven. Give us a bit of, because if you say it's not credit driven and the current inflation figure we have at the moment is at 16.82%, so what would you suppose drove that inflation? What is driving inflation at the moment? And then also, I want you also to look at the cash reserve ratio. Is it okay for the bank to have more money since it is not, the economy is not credit driven as it were? Will it be okay for the bank to have more money to lend out to these SMEs so that they can also be productive as well?
Well, the other economies, US, and most of their expenses, even at the level of consumer spending, are dependent on credit. So each time that...
Hello, Dr. Buddha. Well, I think we're having a level of connection issues with Dr. Muda Yusuf. Hope we can have him now. But of course, the CBN.
Are you with me?
Okay, all right. Continue, please, with your thoughts. Hello, Dr. Muda. Please proceed with your thoughts.
Yes.
Hello, Dr. Muda. Well, I think we're having a bit of challenge with Dr. Muda there. Of course, you're still watching Business Breakfast, looking at the MPC meeting, which is underway right away in Abuja as the CBN Monetary Policy meeting, committee meeting, meets to review the interest rate, or otherwise what you refer to as lending rate, which is ongoing at the moment. And of course, speaking to Dr. Muda.
In terms of the cost of fueling.
Okay.
Because most of the trucks that move around, they are moving around on diesel. So that also has a very serious inflationary pressure. And of course, you know the implication of Ukraine-Russian war on inflation, on food supply, the impact of that on commodity prices, the impact of that on grains, the cost of grains, the impact of that on the cost of wheat. So there's also an international dimension to it. Then there's also the monetary dimension of what we call the ways and means finances of the central bank. The more the central bank supports the federal government in financing deficits, the more inflation we have. Because ways and means finances are what we call high-powered money. So the more the CBN lends money to the federal government, the more we have inflation. So those are the critical drivers of inflation. The inflation we are having is not so much because there's an increase in money supply as such, apart from the issues of the ways and means. It is more about all of these supply side issues. So if you must tackle this, you must be looking at how we can strengthen the supply side of the economy, how we can improve output, how we can reduce bottlenecks in importation, how we can reduce the cost of production, how we can reduce energy costs. Those are the things that should happen. And those things are not within the monetary policy space. Now, talking about issues of CRR and the need to give more money to the SMEs, yes, that is desirable because the CRR that we have is one of the highest in the world. And the fact that we already have this tightening of monetary policy is affecting what we call the financial intermediation role of the banks. Because the primary role of commerce is to mobilize resources from the surplus end of the economy to.
Hello, Dr. Muda. Oh, there. I think we're just having to, there's on and off connection there with Dr. Muda Yusuf. Interesting conversation here as regards the MPC meeting, which is underway in Abuja at the moment in the nation's capital. I'm aware he's back with us. Thank you, Dr. Muda. Please continue with your thoughts there just before we move on to the next. Okay, I guess at this point we just have to take a moment. When we return, of course, we get back to looking at how can the government salvage the situation of already, inflation is already high, talking about the cost of food is high, food inflation is high. So how does he address some of these indicators going forward? I mean, that's what we should look at next when we come back from this short break. We'll be back in a moment. This is Business Breakfast.